So tell me about what led to the decision to build a new hospital building.
When we had physicians that came to town under what's called the preceptor program, they would come to the communities and work. And we had prospects for getting a couple of them, and one of them put his foot down and said, "I'm not coming unless you build a new hospital." Well, physicians were hard enough to come by that rejuvenated with the community. Unfortunately, maybe fortunately, I don't know which, the county attorney at the time failed to get the notice for the bond issue published in time, and so we had somebody in the community that strongly objected, and we weren't able to have a county hospital because of that at that point in time. So
well, roughly what time period was that?
In the mid to late 70s. So Uncle Lester and Lester Barrett, Larry Barrett, and Uncle Ken and some others got together and decided, well, let's just have a fundraiser and build a private hospital. So, private non-for-profit hospital. So they started that project and built the new hospital largely with fund drive from community. When you stop and look at all the things that have been that have been produced by community effort without having to rely on the legislative or municipal projects, we have an awful lot of things here in Colby.
And so when did they build the new?
1981, I believe, was when the hospital was completed and they moved into it, started using it.
And some of the physicians that you were talking about, were they specialists? Were they family?
No, they were family practice physicians. And I served on the physician recruitment committee for a while as we worked through that process. And I think I'm still technically a member, although we are pretty well staffed right now in physicians for the community. And we have the fellow who came to Colby as athletic director or activities director and ended up serving as principal, Larry Gable. His son and daughter-in-law are both physicians. They are coming to Colby, and as a result, he's going to stay in Colby even though he's retired. The other physicians that we have another physician coming this summer, and we'll have a staff of, what does that make, 3 plus 3 physicians
that are here already,
and 2 physician assistants, and I don't know how many nurse practitioners we have now at the clinic.
What are some of the challenges of getting them to come to Colby, the doctors to come to Colby?
I think we've had some good hospital administrators who have been a good draw and have been able to provide those kinds of things. I think there's an attitude among physicians that they would like to be part of a clinic and not have to worry with the taking care of their own clinic and providing their own staffing and things. We've had people who have tried to do that and have not lasted in the community. We need to integrate a little bit better.
So, do you remember your grandchildren coming to visit?
Somewhat,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. What do you remember about the Schumans coming to visit you in Colby?
The Schumans would come through, well, as they were starting off to head to Colorado for Phil's graduate work. And I guess, were you 2 children then?
Just one. Just Melissa.
Melissa,
when we
and
moved.
then Elizabeth came along shortly after that. And then we were in Greeley when you were born. When
Well, no, when Rebecca was born.
Becky was, yeah.
Yeah, you were there when Rebecca was born.
I remember you came.
Because you took Melissa and Liz with you, I think, when you
I
left.
think we brought them back home with us so you guys could have some time alone. And then, I don't remember how many years it was before you, we went down to Alamosa a few times to visit then, and you came through a few times.
On the way to Hutchinson a few times.
To visit.
It was a good halfway point.
Yes.
Do you remember games or things that your grandkids like to play at your house that you...
Oh, they liked to play in the basement. There were lots of toys and things down in the basement. And of course we have the snake story.
Tell us about the snake story.
Well, youngest Rebecca would stay once in a while when her mother was teaching.
This is when we lived in Colby,
Or
right?
working. This was after you'd moved back to Colby. And went down to the basement to play and came up and didn't want to play down there anymore because there was a snake down in the basement. And I insisted, oh, it was just the shadow of a bird that flew by, or it was something else. It wasn't comforting enough for her to go down there. So I don't remember, we probably brought something upstairs for her to play with. Then a couple days later, Paul stepped out of the shower in the basement. There was a snake on the shower mat on the floor. So we managed to catch that snake and get it in a trash can or something, and had to take it to school to show everybody that, yes, there really was a snake. You didn't need to feel badly because you thought you saw, or we thought you saw things and you didn't really.
I remember that somebody told me that Grandpa had just stepped out of the shower, was still wet when he was stomping up the stairs on about the snake. What do you remember about Liz when she was a little girl?
Liz was always very determined. Whatever she was going to do, she was going to do. And if it didn't fit in with everybody else's plan, you had to spend some time with her to get her settled down to where she could cope with it. I can remember holding her, restraining her, as she was sobbing about something that wasn't quite right, and everybody else was doing something she didn't want them to do. She'd finally settle down. But it'd take a while.
Do you remember Ellen and Albert coming to visit?
Albert came when Joe was pregnant with Ellen. She was not feeling well and was not quite able to deal with Albert at the same time. So he came up to visit us quite a bit during that time. He would go and help out at the new church, and everybody was familiar with Albert at the new church. This would have been in late 88 and early 89 when we were building the new church. He liked to go up there and work. But one evening, I think he was just plain worn out, and he started sobbing about something. And it took him forever to get settled down and finally go to sleep. Ellen wasn't here all that much because they kept pretty busy. Albert was in school, and they didn't get a chance to visit out a lot. Joe was doing quite a bit of accompanying at the college. So it seems like I didn't spend as much time with Ellen as I did with some of the other kids.
And Maurice and Marcella, I think, would have been really young when you moved into this house, right?
Not really, really young. When Jean and Kathy were married, and then Jean's job with General Dynamics down in Fort Worth was terminated, and he had to start looking for something, and he applied with Boeing out in Washington State, and by that time Kathy was pregnant, and they found out how expensive it was to have a baby in the United States without health insurance. And so Kathy said, well, for X number of dollars I can go back to Taiwan and get my health care, baby care taken care of there. And so Jean was kind of in charge of getting moved from Fort Worth to Marysville, Washington, which is just outside of Seattle. And he came through with his pickup, and his stuff was being moved. And he had Go-Go with him.
The dog.
Go-Go had been a stray that had, well, Gene had been feeding some cats outside of his house there in Fort Worth. And Go-Go, he discovered that Go-Go was kind of taking advantage of the cat food. So it was looking kind of straggly and scraggy. So this was before Kathy left, he and Kathy cleaned Go-Go up and tried to find an owner and couldn't find anybody who claimed Go-Go. So they ended up keeping her. And then Kathy went back to Taiwan to take care of her medical stuff. For $40 in medical bills over there, she got a complete sonogram, a complete workup for the pregnancy, and all that stuff taken care of. And then by the time they settled in Seattle with Boeing, they were able to get an HMO plan that would take care of Kathy's pregnancy. So they were fixed from there. And of course, the scary thing was that she was born with the heart defect.
Marcella.
Marcella was. And she had to have a shunt when she was like just
A few days old.
a few days old. And that was until she was, I don't remember when they did the first heart surgery. And I can remember visiting with the doctor's wife here in the church in Colby, and we were talking about it, and she said, "You realize that baby's heart is no bigger than a turkey heart, and they're operating on it." Of course, that was real reassuring. But Janine had looked up a lot of information, and we were feeling pretty good about it. And they were talking about others they knew who had had similar defect, and one was a wrestler at the high school level, and so we thought this should go fairly well, just a matter of taking care of it as it goes on. Of course, the health insurance is really a good thing to have. Well, the first time we went to see her, she was just, because of the heart defect, she didn't have enough oxygen going through her system. She was very lethargic, just kind of laid around. And they had a feeding tube. Jean would put in the feeding tube, and they would feed her, and she was not strong enough to suck on the bottle. So I think by the time she was 3, she had enough surgery. They said that the valve that they were concerned about was basically a solid valve, and they had to literally cut the slits to let it work, or let it function. And they said there's no way we can know if that will scar back together, if it will, as the heart grows, if it will, the slits will maintain themselves as they should. So we just have to kind of keep on top of it and do surgeries as necessary as we go along. Well, by the time Maurice was coming along, why, she was doing pretty good. So we flew out to Washington, brought Marcella home for, I think it was 2 weeks or so.
Could have been.
She stayed with us, and then we took her back. Got to meet Maurice. We were probably out in Washington 2 or 3 more times. It was a long trip for them to come all the way to Colby. One time they did come to Colby, and they loaded up some things to take back with them. And it must have been Christmas time, because they slid off the road and the car turned, and they had boxes of dishes and things in that car. Jean's arm was apparently just outside the window, and his right hand was damaged enough so that he couldn't use it for a while. But Jean was always ambidextrous, so it didn't seem to bother him much. He just went right on ahead with his work. And the arm healed, and I don't think he's had, he probably hadn't thought about it for a long time. Then they moved from there to Waco, and we were down there at least once to visit. And I just remember it was hot.
A couple of times he went to, they lived in a couple places in Texas, haven't they?
and then moved back to Fort Worth.
Yeah.
They were in Waco, and Gene was working for Raytheon. And while he was there, the fellow who'd been a group leader at General Dynamics was now working for the Lockheed Martin, which had the same facilities that General Dynamics had. And that fella came down and recruited Gene and said, "We'd like to have you come back and work for us." And Gene had to work for Raytheon for at least a year to get his moving, or he'd have to repay his $15,000 or something worth of moving expenses. And so Gene said, "Well, I can't right away, but maybe in a little while." Well, there was enough of a downturn in things that it was plenty long before he was able to actually go back to Fort Worth.
Yeah, because he switched jobs quite a few times, I know. And what about Jo and her organ?
Jo and her organ
Yeah.
work? Well, once Ellen became of college age, then, well, I think Jo was driving down maybe like on one day and staying overnight and taking a couple classes and doing some organ lesson work, and then would drive back to Hayes. And then once Ellen started college, she and Ellen took an apartment together and went down to Lawrence together.
Okay, and then I also wanted to ask you about your butterfly project.
The butterfly wheel?
Yeah.
Okay. When we were in Texas for a Rotary convention, we were at San Antonio, and one of the places where we visited was a garden that had been part of some hemisphere exhibit down in Texas. Or did you go to that?
I did go
Jerry?
to a hemisphere in San Antonio, I think.
Yeah, San Antonio. And
With
anyway,
Dad and Grandpa
the garden
Steele.
there, they had a Butterflies of Texas wheel. And I thought, oh, what a neat thing. And so I brought one back home with me. And I decided there wasn't any reason why we shouldn't have one of those in Kansas. So I went to a group called Cabbage, which is the Kansas Association of Arboreta and Botanical Gardens, but they call themselves Cabbage. And I said, I found this while I was down in Texas. How come we don't have one in Kansas? And one of the guys who is in charge of horticulture at K-State said, "Well, why don't we?" And he looked right at me. So I decided, okay, here's a challenge if ever there was one. So I started in, and I decided I wanted the butterflies to be in relative size to each other. I mean, the big ones should be big, and the little ones should be little. And so I made that design decision. And I also decided I didn't want them all the kind that are put in a kill jar and then mounted with a pin on a board, and you can see the pin sticking out of them. I wanted some that were actually pictures of those butterflies on
So those are
something.
pictures and not
live. Yeah. And I wanted the larva and the pupa so that people would know, okay, that thing that's chewing up my dill seed is going to be a swallowtail butterfly, or my dill plant is going to be a swallowtail butterfly, and not just a scraggy old worm that I'm going to smash. And so I was working hard to get those things done and get some of the foods that they get ready for. And then I had to decide what ones am I going to use on my butterfly wheel. And I decided I would stick with ones that were fairly common throughout Kansas and that were also easy to spot in gardens and roadsides and parks, so that they'd be ones that people would run into. And then if they found others, maybe they'd go to the fancier butterfly books and things. So we worked on it and finally got some financing to pay for it and got them printed and put them out. And so they're still available. I had to correspond with several people, several different photographers, and lots of them were willing to give me the right to use their pictures, particularly the larva and the pupa pictures, and had relatively good luck with them.
How'd you just, are these all ones that are native to Kansas? Is that kind of why?
I don't know whether you call them native, but they're certainly fairly abundant in Kansas.
Okay.
You can find them almost any place in the state. There'll be some places in the, out here in the far northwest corner, the far southwest corner, there's some of them that you won't find very often. But you'd have to have a pretty specialized garden area to find them.
Okay, well, that's probably a good time to stop.